Boston-Brighton District City Councilor. Today is Monday, April 29th. We are here with our friends from the Boston Public School Department to discuss, what's today's topic again? Data and accountability?
BPS academics.
Oh, BPS academics. Apologize. I'd like to remind folks this is a public hearing, both being broadcast and recorded for later viewing on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd like to ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. We will take public testimony at the end of this hearing and maybe at other various points throughout the hearing. I would appreciate it if you would sign in. To my left, there are sign-in sheets. We ask that you state your name, any affiliation, residence, and please check the box if you wish to testify. I'd like to strongly encourage residents, whether here in the chamber or at home, to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. And you can do this in several ways. You can come to one of the 34 hearings and give public testimony. Come to the hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 4th, anytime from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. We'll be here at least for that time frame, and we'll stay as long as we need to hear from everyone and who would like to speak on the budget. You can send your testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, City Council, 5th floor, Boston City Hall, Boston, Mass. 02201, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Again, the dockets referred to under academics are dockets 0622 through 0625. Orders for the FY20 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriations for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, and appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, as well as dockets 0626 through 0628, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. I am joined today by my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my immediate left, Councilor at Large Anissa Sabi-George. To my immediate right, Councilor Kim Janey. And to my far right, who stepped out, Councilor Andrea Campbell and Councilor Matt O'Malley. I'd like to, again, welcome BPS and the team and hand it over to Dr. Granson.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Sielmo and Councilors Janey, Sabi-George, and O'Malley. Thank you for asking us here to share the work we're doing to support students in the Boston Public Schools. As Chief Academic Officer for Boston Public Schools, I oversee the Academics and Students Supports Academics and Student Supports for Equity team, which includes the Office of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness, the Office of Special Education, the Office of English Learners, the Office of Opportunity Gaps, the Office of Academics and Professional Learning, and the Office of Extended Learning Opportunities. As a team, we work in collaboration with other departments to address our problem of practice that BPS does not consistently provide authentic learning opportunities for our students who are most marginalized to develop into self-determined independent learners who are able to pursue their aspirations. And we recognize that our failures lead to disengaged students and significant achievement gaps. One department cannot solve these issues in isolation. We must have an academic strategy that understands the needs of our students with disabilities, our English learners, and encompasses social, emotional, academic, and social, emotional, and academic development and wellness strategies, and that strategically aims to eliminate opportunity gaps. When we let one department create the instructional strategies, it often leads to a siloed approach that leaves many of our students marginalized. In Boston, we are working on breaking down those silos and providing a comprehensive academic strategy to support our students, families, teachers, and schools. Again, thank you for allowing us to share our work with you today. We look forward to continue this work with you in partnership with the Mayor's Office and the City Council. I'm going to now turn it over to Mary Dolman, who's Executive Director of the Office of Data and Accountability. And from there, we'll hear from our recently appointed Deputy Chief Academic Officer, Andrea Zayas. After that, followed by Dr. Colin Rose, Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Opportunity Gaps. And after that, Priya Tihiliani, who is the Assistant Superintendent of the Office of English Learners. And we're also joined by Nate Cooter, Deputy CFO, who will give us lots of great support today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm Mary Dolman. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Data and Accountability, and I'm pleased this morning to share some highlights from the 2018 accountability, MCAS, and graduation rate data, as well as a little bit of background on our office. So our department's mission, and just a pause, who's controlling the slide deck?
I think this is.
Oh, great.
Sorry.
Thank you.
If it doesn't work, I can do it from here. Probably closer, I'll do it. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Is it on?
There it goes.
Fantastic.
There it goes. Thank you.
So the Office of Data and Accountability, our mission is to serve the BPS community by facilitating access to quality information and building capacity to make data-driven decisions that advance educational equity, opportunity, and achievement for all students. Our department includes 20 employees who are grouped into 5 teams around our 5 strategic priorities, which include data reporting and analytics, research, data inquiry coaching, assessment, and performance management. As you'll see on the next slide, our budget is fairly unchanged from the previous year, maintaining staffing levels and all the same major contracts. Before I dive into our accountability highlights on the next slide, you'll see just some information on accountability indicators. So we changed our accountability system this past year for districts and schools. So the new system includes measures in 5 different indicator categories. So achievement, student growth, high school completion, English language proficiency, and other additional indicators, such as chronic absenteeism and the percentage of 11th and 12th graders who are completing advanced coursework. Some of the most significant changes to the accountability system for this year include transitioning from classifying performance according to 5 accountability levels to utilizing 4 accountability categories. Districts are also now categorized according to their overall performance against targets, whereas in the past they were categorized based on the lowest performing schools in the district. There's also been a shift to categorizing schools based on the performance against targets for all students and the lowest performing 25% of students. And there's a focus on raising the performance of each district or school's lowest performing students, so raising the achievement floor rather than on gap narrowing. The new system includes some additional indicators. Those new measures include the extended engagement rate, which is calculated as the 5-year cohort graduation rate plus the percentage of students still enrolled in school. The progress towards English proficiency, which is measured on the Access for ELLs assessment. Chronic absenteeism rate, which is calculated as the percentage of students missing 10% or more of days of membership in each year. And the percentage of 11th and 12th graders completing advanced coursework, such as AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. So there are several highlights that I want to share about our district accountability data. So BPS met ELA achievement targets for all students in grades 3 to 8, and for the lowest performing student subgroup in grades 3 to 8, as well as high school. But most notably, there are several schools whose accomplishments I want to highlight. So the John Winthrop School exited level 4 status in 2018. It was just one of 4 schools across the state to do so. And the Winthrop is now designated as meeting targets, earning 79% of all possible target points. And in addition, there were 2 BPS schools that received the designation of schools of recognition. There are 2 of just 52 that were identified across the state for exceptional achievement, improvement, or growth. So the Winship Elementary was named a school of recognition for exceeding targets, earning 98% of possible target points. And the Manning School was named a school of recognition for exceeding targets, earning 96% of possible target points, and also for high growth, with a mean student growth percentile of 67 in ELA and 71 in math. Moving on to 2018 MCAS performance. In particular, performance in English language arts in grades 3 to 8 was strong overall, with the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations, and the mean student growth percentile increasing for every district subgroup from 2017 to 2018. Also, former ELs generally outperformed the all students group across grade levels and subjects, and the district experienced some progress in the percentage of students scoring proficient or advanced in the high school science assessment. The overall distribution of performance on the Next Gen MCAS in grades 3 to 8 was fairly similar to 2017, which was the first year of the new assessment, though the percentage of students scoring and meeting and exceeding expectations in ELA did increase from 31 to 34%, and the gap between the district and the state narrowed in both subjects. Turning to grade 10 MCAS, there was no change from 2017 to 2018 for the all students group in English language arts, and there were minimal or no change by race or ethnicity. In grade 10 math, we saw that there was a 2 percentage point decline overall in the proportion of students who are proficient or advanced in 2018 compared to 2017. And as mentioned, the district experienced a 5 percentage point increase in the percentage of students who are proficient or advanced in grade 10 science, with all racial and ethnic subgroups improving from 2017 as well, though proficiency rates do remain low overall, with 53% of students proficient or advanced. Lastly, turning to our 4-year cohort graduation rate, it's risen 13.7 percentage points in the past 10 years, from 61.4% to 75.1% in 2018, which is the highest ever recorded for Boston Public Schools. The 4 major race groups in BPS all experienced improvement as well. And the percentage of the 9th grade cohort that dropped out has also steadily decreased over those 10 years, from 19.5% in 2009 to 10.3% in 2018. So I hope those quick data highlights will be useful as we move on to hearing about the rest of the academics presentation.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Zayas. I've recently been appointed as Deputy Chief Academic Officer. I started in the district this past school year as an academic superintendent working with Network 4. And I mentioned that to describe the deep experience that I got in getting to know 9 of our highest needs schools. It's part of the context that I bring to understanding how we can continue to provide the supports that our schools need. The Office of Academics and Professional Learning, our vision is to ensure that all of our educators have access to the knowledge, skills, and resources that they need to provide every single one of our students with high quality, culturally and linguistically sustaining, well-rounded educational experiences every day. We really truly believe that the way that we go about doing that is ensuring that we're building the capacity in our educators, strengthening that capacity every day for them to be able to deliver standards-aligned, essentials-informed instruction in every single one of our classrooms. And that would look like recognizing, celebrating, and building upon the diverse experiences, talents, and skills that students themselves bring to the learning environment. Centering our students' experiences is critical. I'm going to go through what our expenditures look like, but first want to actually, on this slide, provide a little bit of context around what it is that we are intending to support through these expenditures this coming school year. So we're really listening very intently to what school leaders and teachers are telling us that they need, and we're designing and delivering right on time standards and essentials aligned professional learning experiences that are culturally relevant and responsive, and that are going to be delivered at the district level in a really strategic way through our network structure and through our content teams. Our content teams are also known as individual departments. So as you see, we have, and as you know, our Visual and Performing Arts Department, early childhood, world languages, ELA, math, science, etc. Our early childhood team, who is here today, has recently received a large investment from City Hall, for which we are grateful, which will allow us to expand our UPK endeavors across the city through a mixed delivery system. Our personnel budget, as you can see, is the way that we spend the majority of our dollars so that we can provide coaching and support directly through our network structure to school leaders, to directors of instruction, and directly to teachers, both through the network structure and through district-wide professional learning. This year, we're increasing our investment in science. We specifically have been working this year to improve the standards alignment to our 3 through 8 curriculum, ensuring that the enhanced units that we provide in an equitable way across the district are standards aligned. This coming year, we will be expanding that effort to include grades 6 through 8, really specifically expanding on one of the pilots that we engaged in this past school year. Additionally, we're continuing to expand on our work in the visual and performing arts, increasing somewhat our capacity in our visual arts department, ensuring that our content specialists have the time and resources that they need to adequately support teachers on the ground, as well as ensuring that we are fully prepared to support teachers in the shift to the new Massachusetts curricular frameworks. And then finally, kind of a double click into our early childhood budget, where you can see the UPK investment, as well as the pre-K through second grade curriculum alignment and PD and coaching supports. As you know, our early childhood endeavors have been really successful, nationally recognized over the last handful of years. And we're visualizing here for you the sort of depth of the investment that it takes to get those sort of really incredible results. And our intention is to ensure that we're providing not only the high quality standards aligned curriculum in all of our content areas, but in addition to that, that we're providing right on time coaching, training, and implementation support for our teachers, because we know that having high quality and aligned materials doesn't nearly go close enough or far enough in supporting teachers the way that they need in order for young people to have the experiences that we want them to be having in classrooms. So that means ensuring that common planning times are getting supported, that teachers have the kind of implementation support, that they have annotations to the curriculum that help them make the kinds of choices that ensure that the curriculum is exactly what students need it to be, that it's relevant, culturally responsive, standards aligned, and essentials informed. Lastly, just a little bit of a timeline on our UPK and quality elements. We issued an RFP and proposals are due this week. Our intention is for 450 mixed delivery, high quality seats to be available this coming year. And we will be selecting providers along the lines of a number of different quality elements, and we'll be providing them support and monitoring throughout the school year.
Good morning. My name is Colin Rose, and I am the Assistant Superintendent for the Opportunity Gap in BPS. I just want to go a little bit over the why around my office and then get into the budget. It is our belief that eliminating opportunity gaps is not only vital for the success of Boston Public Schools, but also the survival of our democratic and pluralistic society. Our goal as an office is to help push all in the system to eliminate barriers and open up new avenues of opportunity for our populations that have been historically marginalized. and create the equity innovations that help move the district towards a more equitable structure, practices, and ultimately outcomes. We need to continue to change student experience, the opportunity afforded our students, if we want to see change and achievement. Our office has three main buckets of work, starting with our systemic oversight through the Opportunity Achievement Gaps Policy and Implementation Plan we built with every office in BPS. This strategic plan pushes all offices and schools in BPS to put equity in the forefront of their work, and was the genesis and the origin of this office over a decade ago. Some major goals that we've been able to partner to accomplish include the spread of culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, or CLSP, the Opportunity Index, school-based diversity goals, and numerous other goals that we could talk about in operations and academics. Beyond that, our office has taken the lead in some capacity building in the district, mainly around CLSP, training principals, teachers, cabinet members, partners, and others. This work has been infused into the collaboration with other asset offices and continues to be the base of our instructional vision for the district, with every school having a CLSP goal as one of their 2 priority goals in their quality school plans. We're also helping to incubate and eventually scale innovative programming, again, aimed at changing the educational environment for our most marginalized populations. Programs such as Building Assets, Reducing Risk, or BAR, Early Warning Indicator Systems, Peer Group Connections, are all aimed at using the strengths of students to keep them on track for graduation and beyond. Our exam school initiative has opened more access both to test preparation and the actual exam, and there are other programs that push in different directions for our most marginalized populations. So this is our proposed FY 2020 budget for the office. As you can see, a little over half of that budget goes towards a program called Excellence for All, which we will highlight more in a moment. Another large part of the budget is for the academic response team, who help coach in struggling schools through our network process. Other areas include capacity building for CLSP, dollars for our targeted programming, and specific dollars for the exam school initiative, written here as access to higher level coursework. The remainder is FTE for our core leadership team stewarding the work. Now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into Excellence for All, since it is the biggest part of our budget, and the largest budget line in my office. EFA is a model that is designed to expand access to more challenging and culturally relevant studies and enrichment for all BPS 4th through 6th graders, with special attention to the needs of historically marginalized populations. Our pillars include rigorous instruction, quality enrichments, CLSP with social emotional learning, executive functioning, and personalized learning pathways. Currently, there are 16 schools, and you can see that by neighborhood on this slide, that currently have the EFA model. As you can see, the schools are geographically spread across the district, and as you will see in the next slide, these schools also match the demographics of our district. The hope is to be back here a year from now with an educational and financial plan to begin to scale this model to all 4th through 6th grade classrooms in the district as this pilot wraps up this year. Quickly, here are the demographics for EFA compared to others, to our system-wide demographics and demographics of AWC. As you can see, there's parity between the populations of EFA and the district. We try to be very representative when we pick the schools, and that does not hold true for AWC. And on top of that, EFA's current reach, even in pilot phase, is much greater. Finally, I wanted to share the budget breakdown for that $2.5 million proposed for the EFA budget next year, most of which go to direct services to students and schools. World language, STEM instruction and curriculum, direct coaching to schools are much of the budget. There are also major lines for social emotional and CLSP work, as well as the capstone project every student in EFA is involved with in every year. With that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to my colleague Priya who will lead the Office of English Learners portion of this presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, City Council members. I am Priya Tihiliani, the Assistant Superintendent for the Office of English Learners. I have the honor of leading the work of OEL, and I am pleased to be able to highlight for you some of our accomplishments from this past year and our proposed budget for next year. If I may, I would like to preface with our department's long-standing, it's not loud.
Clicker working?
Oh, sorry.
She got it, she got it.
With our department's long-standing vision, which has been to promote bilingualism and biliteracy for all students. The recent passage of the Look Act further validates our mission by considering all of our students, English learners and non-English learners, as emerging bilinguals who require access to high-quality language instruction and support. We strongly believe that language and culture is the key to our student success and should be at the forefront of our minds. Thus, the work this year is centered around building the foundational components required for students to have access to native language instruction and resources. Here you see an overview of the English learners in our district, broken down by proficiency level in English, grade, and language. Our current and former English learners comprise almost half of the student population in Boston. It is exciting to note how extremely lucky we are to live in a city like Boston that is so rich in culture and diversity, more so than most urban cities in the U.S. As demonstrated in this slide, collectively, our English learners and their families speak over 70 languages. Not mentioned in this slide is the fact that our students and their families come from 130 different countries. Our priorities in serving our amazingly diverse English learners are in these 5 areas with instruction at the forefront. We aim to provide instructionally sound, high-quality programs both during the school day and in the form of supplemental services such as after-school and summer school. These programs offer targeted language instruction that is delivered through grade-appropriate and standards-aligned curriculum, with newly increased access to native language support and resources. We also hold in equally high regard our responsibility to engage our EL parents and their families. This is an area where we constantly strive to improve, and we're thus excited to invite to our team a parent engagement specialist focused specifically on Arabic-speaking families. Our Newcomers Assessment and Counseling Center provides language proficiency assessments to identify English learners and their level of service need, and also to ensure that our parents understand the type of program that will best meet the service needs of their child. As we do our utmost to ensure that we communicate with families in their native language, we've increased the number of Spanish-speaking testers on staff and have for the first time added a full-time Vietnamese tester. We continue to ensure communications are translated and interpreted so that parents have meaningful access to their students' education and to district policies. As we strive for even greater access for families, this past year we implemented telephonic interpretation as an additional measure for schools to use for their on-the-spot interpretation needs. Lastly, we support schools to ensure English learners are receiving equitable requisite services that meet state, local, and federal guidelines. Although compliance is not determinative of our instructional programming, our approach to this work is that compliance is the floor and instruction is the ceiling. This slide demonstrates how we have aligned our funds to these priorities. Our department's budget is generally proposed to be level funded for next year. What I'd like to highlight in our budget is the new approach we took this year to partner more closely with schools to provide them with ESL and native language curricular resources. We asked schools to identify the resources that would best meet the needs of their students and provided schools with those resources as well as professional development on how to use those resources in the classroom. We dedicated over $500,000 to these school supports. In addition to instructional resources, our next largest investment continues to be in providing meaningful native language access to our families. As I previously mentioned, and as I know you are all aware, when the Look Act passed in November of 2017, it demonstrated a substantial win for the families of Boston. Not only did the Look Act overturn the English-only edict in Massachusetts, but it also reaffirmed OEL's belief that native language is our greatest instructional lever for our English learners. The Look Act affords districts with the flexibility to teach core content in the student's native language, thereby affirming the importance of bilingual programs such as dual language, which have historically proven to close the opportunity gap for students. The Look Act also codifies the power of EL parent advocacy by requiring EL parent advisory groups for districts with members that reflect the linguistic demographics of the students. In our effort to promote native language, we are particularly excited to highlight our investment in a partnership with Adam Strom from Reimagining Migration and Jean-Michel Dessard, the award-winning filmmaker and critically acclaimed director of I Learn America. We know that in the United States, 26% of our youth are immigrants or children of immigrants. And yet immigration has taken on a negative connotation and even a polarizing effect in our nation and in our schools. Our Sharing Migration project focuses on recognizing that migration is a shared human experience that travels back as far in time as we do. Too often there is a disconnect between the public conversations about immigration, what we teach in schools, and our students' lives. This project seeks to bridge that gap through a very intentional collaboration that integrates students in our general education history and social studies classrooms with students with limited or interrupted formal education who are new to our country within the past few years. Together, these students are engaging in a series of storytelling workshops where they produce modules based on their personal or family migration experience and express their stories through photo essays, short videos, digital stories, and visual art. Here we highlight just a few of the other investments we have made to keep native language supports at the forefront of our work, the greatest of which is certainly an increase of fiction and nonfiction resources in Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Chinese. Not only do these materials support our current curriculum, but they are also culturally responsive texts that are aligned by theme and leveled for proficiency. By providing teachers with the right tools, English learners with different levels of English proficiency can access grade-appropriate texts and participate in cognitively demanding tasks, whilst also developing their language and content skills in English and in their native language. For the first time, we are building capacity into Aspen, the district's online student information system, to accommodate character-based languages such as Chinese and Arabic so that we can provide automated parental notifications in all of our district's major languages. As I mentioned previously, for the first time this past year, we were pleased to offer schools the opportunity to use on-demand telephonic interpretation services for instances when parent communication is not pre-scheduled, but is needed immediately for parent drop-ins or for emergencies. This service is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year-round, every day, in 350 languages. While we continue to provide in-person interpretation for formal or pre-scheduled meetings, telephonic enhances our portfolio to add an extra level of language access to parents. As I stated before, OEL's primary goal is to ensure that appropriate native language supports are provided to our students, and I would like to end with a similar note. Native language matters. Native language matters because it reinforces the importance of our students' identity and of their culture. Native language matters because language is critical for EL families to have meaningful access to their students' education. Native language matters because if our students maintain their native language, they are college and career ready. Native language matters because it builds a culture that promotes equity and inclusivity. Native language matters because it eliminates the opportunity gap, which is what our students so justly deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that conclude all the presentations? Thank you. Shortly after you began your presentations, we were joined by Councilors Ed Flynn and Councilor Tim McCarthy. Chair will now recognize Councilor Anisabi George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here today. Appreciate the thoughtfulness of your presentation. I'm looking at, I guess, the third page from the beginning, and where we're referencing some of the leveling of our schools, celebrating the Winthrop School exiting level 4 turnaround status, schools of recognition. Can someone outline the breakdown of how many schools in our district are level 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So one of the changes with the new accountability system is that we've moved away from the numeric leveling that we've had in the past to new accountability categories. There are 4 designations now, and those include schools that are meeting targets, schools that are partially meeting targets, schools that are receiving targeted support or broader comprehensive support. And in terms of the breakdown, one thing to note is the district also received a categorization, which is a new change. In the past, the district was labeled according to the lowest performing school in the district. Under the new system, the district receives a designation according to the overall district performance.
So meeting, partially meeting, receiving support, so just 3?
Targeted support, and then broader comprehensive support is the 4th category. And because of all the changes to the accountability system.
What are the 4 categories, please?
Sure, so meeting targets, partially meeting targets, targeted support, and then broad/comprehensive support.
And can I just ask that you provide that description for every school in a easily read format?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
So how many of our schools are meeting targets?
Sure. So in the district overall was rated as partially meeting targets. And then in terms of the breakdown for specific schools, overall in the district, we had 23 schools that were designated as meeting targets. We had 29.
I'm sorry, could you,
23 schools meeting targets.
29?
23.
23. Thank you.
Sure. Would you like the other,
Yes,
count by
please.
other categories?
Sure.
So for partially meeting targets, 29 schools. For the focused targeted support category, 40 schools. And then for the last category, broad comprehensive support, 9 schools. Additionally, there are 10 schools that had insufficient data to receive an accountability designation. And we'll follow up with the breakdown for every school so that you can see the list of which schools fell into each category.
Great.
So with that, if just my quick math here, we're missing about 25 schools or 23 schools maybe? We have, how many schools we have in the district?
So the numbers I just gave you don't include the Horace Mann charter schools. Sorry, there are 16 schools with insufficient data.
16 with insufficient. How many schools do we have in our portfolio? Boston Public Schools.
There are 117 if you use the state's consideration of which schools count officially as part of Boston Public Schools, 117.
And where are the other 10 schools or 8 schools? We have 125 schools in our Boston Public Schools portfolio?
So there are some schools that are considered like in-district charter schools. And
Okay.
so the state doesn't include, we can also provide that count obviously
Okay, that'd be
as well.
Okay,
But in
so-
terms of the 117, that breakdown I gave you provides the ones that are counted for official accountability designations as part of the Boston Public Schools.
Great, thank you. And of the schools, you know, obviously the ones that we're most concerned about are the receiving targeted supports or broad comprehensive support, so that 49 schools, and then I'm not quite sure what's happening with those 16 schools with not enough information. But have we looked at, say, those 50 or so schools, maybe 65 schools, and looked at them in relation to what they're receiving for funding as a part of our budgeting process for next school year?
So one piece, it might be helpful before I touch on that piece, around the schools with insufficient data, the reason that schools are generally categorized as having insufficient data is either because they're an early childhood center, so they don't have tested grade levels, which is where most of the accountability system points come from, or it might be because it's a new school, or the grade level configuration might have changed in the school, so the state just doesn't have adequate data, since you need 2 years of data just to calculate targets. In terms of whether or not we have looked at funding, one of the things we do, and here I might pass it over to Nate Cooter, is that we do consider school performance in our weighted school funding formula, and so that's sort of built in terms of the needs of the students. And also, Colin, I don't know if you want to speak to our OI score and how that also is used to inform our funding. So it's very front and center, though it's more tied to the specific individual students in our schools than the state accountability framework per se, which isn't as precise and doesn't include as many measures as we'd like to consider.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways that we're trying to, I think, get at those that need the most. The OI is one, and we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow during that presentation. Also, I think the network structure in and of itself, Andrea talked a little bit about heading up as an academic superintendent a network of 9 schools, and so the schools that need the most support, we're trying to break down into smaller units and have more support, like through liaisons to all of our offices, that can be available for those schools at a higher touch level than the schools that are on target. So there's other than the foundational budget, which Nate can speak to, there's other things that we're trying to do out of our office to give those schools more support.
I don't have too much more to add. I think we have not done a lot of the sort of analysis of the impact of the budget on a per pupil basis versus schools. I think a lot of the weighted student funding, Mary has already mentioned that we do account for individual student test scores in 2 ways. The first is through the Opportunity Index. The second is through, at the high school level, 9th and 10th graders who are at high risk of dropping out. They also receive an additional weight. And we've done more to publish online so people could go and download from the budget website now all of the per pupil cost. I will say the biggest driver of per pupil cost at a school, and the biggest driver of the school's overall budget is the number of students of high need that they serve, both English learners and special education students. And I think oftentimes when we start thinking about performance as it relates to funding, we really want to disaggregate the performance by group, and we start to get a much more nuanced picture of school performance. And I think the key question is for which student group is a school high performing, and in what ways are they getting high performance? And I think sort of a simple total budget, total enrollment, state accountability is just, it's too blunt of a measure. We're trying to really understand sort of which schools are really the best for students, serving students in a specific English learner program, or getting down to it and understanding which schools have the best ABA program that we can replicate and understand. And that goes, we obviously feel very strongly that funding is an important element of that. We really drive for equity on a per pupil basis for all of our programs, but we really want to understand once the schools get the funding, how do they use it and how can we learn from that?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that breakdown.
Sure.
That's really helpful. As you get the information of the actual schools to us in terms of the breakdown of whether or not they're meeting their targets, I think it would also be good to have information that allows us to see of all of our students, of all of our Black students, of all of our Latino students, which schools they're in. So if we could have this also broken down by X% of Black students are in meeting target, partially meeting target, focused targeted support, broad comprehensive support. If we could just have that breakdown by a demographic of students as well. I want to give a shout out to the Winthrop for moving up and no longer being designated as a level 4, that is a District 7 school, so definitely want to shout them out. Lots of things to tackle here, and I know we're short on time. If we just look at, let's look at the opportunity and achievement gap in terms of EFA and advanced work. What slide was that? How many students are now in, or what percentage, is it on the slide? What slide is that? These are not numbered, I'm sorry.
It's like 24.
Yes, it's in the back here. So these are the number of students, this 198?
So this is a snapshot of fourth grade this current year.
Yep.
So AWC has 198. EFA is currently serving 829 students in that grade.
And is the goal to continue to expand
Yeah.
the EFA so that all fourth grade students are getting the rigor?
Yeah, so the initial plan was a 3-year pilot. This is the 3rd year, so we have a study with NYU coming out over the summer.
Oh, wonderful.
And we'll be working this spring and summer to come and propose a plan of scaling. And so that's why I say next year, when we're before you, hopefully we'll have a scaling plan for both educationally, but also budget-wise, and how many years we can get to full scale across the district.
Wonderful, that would be great. In terms of the ELL, which I'm a big fan of bilingualism and biliteracy for all students, and I agree that that should be the goal. Can you tell me how that is being actualized? Because right now, ELL feels very much like a strategy to educate English language learners, which is very important, but I'm not sure where we're getting at for all students in this.
So next year, we're very excited to pilot developmental bilingual education, which is similar to transitional bilingual education, which is what we had before question 2. However, in developmental bilingual education, there is also a focus on maintaining and developing the native language versus transitioning out of the native language. So we are going to have 3 pilots of developmental bilingual education. They are going to be at the Quincy Lower, Harvard Kent, and at the the Quincy and the PJK in East Boston.
So I understand the desire, and I think it's crucial in terms of helping English language learners maintain and preserve their native language. What I'm asking is how we get at this beyond a strategy for educating ELLs, but so that all students coming out of BPS, any student that graduates BPS, I believe should be bilingual, have a minimum of 2, if not 3 languages, all students. And so how do we get there? How do we create more dual language opportunities for all of our young people? Right now, even our dual language schools, it seems that a large population in our dual language schools are either ELLs, or they tend to be parents who are very savvy and know the importance of getting that second language for their child. But it's not the students that we're talking about when we're talking about closing gaps, per se. So how do we get at making sure that everyone has opportunity?
So we are coming up with a 5-year strategic plan for how we are going to add in dual language programs every year. We do have 2-way immersion programs in the district right now, which do exactly what you say, which are 50% native English speakers and 50% English learners. However, there is also the option of 1-way immersion, which serves all native speakers. And the other option that we are looking at is also heritage language, which again is more of a focus on the native speaker. So those are both models that we are going to be expanding in the district.
Wonderful. And I know my time is coming short, so I want to make sure that we're getting at the achievement gap question. On slide, it's grade 10 MCAS scores. So what I don't see are actual numbers for what the gaps are. I see the graphics with the colors going up and going down.
Yep.
If we look at math in particular, so one, I'd like to see what the actual gaps are.
Sure.
So what the actual numbers are, the gaps. When we're looking at, and not just by race, but by program area, so I'd like to understand how our students with disabilities are doing as well as our English language learners. If we just look at math, for example, what it looks like to my eyes, and it's hard to tell without numbers with the actual gap, but it looks like the gap is widening. So what I see are for Asian students and for white students an uptick in the math for 2018, and then I see for the purple line Latino, Hispanic, and the green line for black students going down. So if I see those groups going up, the other groups going down, that's a widening of the gap. But again, I don't have the numbers here because the numbers are not in front of me. So it'd be important to have the numbers in 2. What are we doing about this widening of the gap?
Sure.
Even in the other two graphs, it looks like the gap is staying steady. What it's not doing is closing.
So I can give you those numbers, and then we'll also obviously include that in our follow-up analysis. But for 2018, you're correct. So for all students, performance went from 67 to 65% proficiency.
This is math.
Yep. So that's where we got that 2 percentage point decline overall. When you break it down by race or ethnicity, and again, we'll provide these numbers too for follow-up. For our African American and Black students, the proficiency rate declined from 61% to 57%. And for Asian students, increased from 91 to 93%. For our Latino students, the proficiency rate declined from 59 to 58%, so 1 percentage point decline.
So my time is up, and I want to respect that I have other colleagues here. I think getting those numbers would be really helpful, but even more than that, what I want to understand is what do we make of that? Why did the gap widen, and then what are we going to do about it? So obviously I want the data, but really I think this conversation, what's important about this conversation is that we're getting at why did we see the gap increase, and what are we going to do different to make sure that we're closing the gaps? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and we've been joined by Counselor at Large Michael Flaherty. Chair recognizes Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Counselor Siomo, and thank you all for being here and for your presentations and the hard work that you guys do. We don't often, I'll speak for myself, highlight all the positives. Typically hone in on what's not working because time is of the essence, and we only have a certain amount of time with you guys. But I do want to start with thanking you guys for the hard work you do every day. Just following up on, frankly, some lines of questioning from Counselor Janey, which I agree with her. It's always sad to either see the numbers stay the same for our Black and Latino students across some of these MCAS measurements, or of course for them to go down in certain subject areas. So would love to continue the conversation around why that's the case, from where you sit, what do you think is the problem there, and then how do we go about closing those gaps?
So
do you want me to start?
I was about to start.
Okay.
So I really appreciate the question. It's what I spend my time thinking about every day, all day, and what our team is across departments tackling and attacking really specifically every day. So it's a complex, interconnected, really challenging problem that our peers across the country are working with us and alongside us to understand all the dimensions of, and there are particularities to Boston and to our classrooms as well. So I'll say a few things and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Rose, to add some additional pieces. Curriculum really, really matters. The quality of our teachers really matters. And so and their opportunities to grow also really, really matters. We've done the lion's share of recommending that our schools adopt standards-aligned, high-quality curriculum over the last handful of years. And what we know from our recent set of research that we did really specific to our classrooms is that in many cases, the curriculum has been purchased, adopted, and is being partially implemented. We recognize that in classrooms where that partial implementation is happening, we have partial results. So our work is in supporting school leaders and teachers in unpacking that curriculum, making it really relevant to our students, helping them to customize it so that it's culturally relevant and also just right on time for what students really need. So that's some of the work that we have ahead of us, and it's embedded in what you've heard us talk about in previous hearings around the essentials and how we've sort of codified our instructional vision into a framework and a set of practices that we're consistently training teachers on. We have some work to do to develop toolkits to support teachers and how to do that at the classroom level, how to take the curriculum and really have it come to life in the ways that our young people deserve. so that their experiences with mathematics or their experiences with the text is actually really remarkably different than what it is.
Just to
now.
interject there, just because time is of the essence.
Sure.
I've been visiting schools where the sad part is you wouldn't know that some of these schools that have populations that tend to be our most needy, whether it is some of the English language learners, some of our poorest students, and that have seen some really great results on the MCAS scores. And so I go into a building and I'm like, who knew? This is incredible. This should be on the cover of every magazine, every newspaper article, and all across City Hall. So is there a list of the schools, and I've only visited some of those because many are outside of my district, but is there a list of schools that are doing this really well that, for example, these last metrics have shown an increase going in the opposite direction for math or science? And what can we learn from those schools as to how they made that happen?
Yes. So we can get you a list of our bright spots and where quality practices are happening. And I would urge us to think about those quality practices beyond what results in higher scores, because not everything that is tested matters, right? And not everything that matters is tested, right?
No, that I
So-
understand, but if we're looking at these, you know,
Absolutely.
exactly.
No, just,
Yeah.
and so we're learning both from those classrooms where we're seeing those bumps, right? And also from classrooms where young people and families and teachers are talking about the higher quality experiences that they're having as well.
Colin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to double down on student experience. We need to change long-term the student experience in our classrooms from K to 12, right? And so it starts with the mindset and training of teachers, right? Those are the vehicles, right? So if I don't believe the students in front of me can achieve at a certain rigor level, how are they ever going to reach it, right? And so that's some of the mindset and CLSP work we try to do. Curriculum that speaks and engages students, uses the schema they're coming in culturally to bring them into the subject matter. Those things matter. And so that's some of the work that we've started. And I would say not only looking at schools, but, you know, walking around the district looking teacher to teacher. There are bright spots in every building. How do we take what they're doing and really scale it across the building, across the district?
Thank you. And this is just a request for the chair. On the list of the schools, based on the accountability levels, Councilor Janey asked for demographics, which are similar. Can we also have it by geographic location? So where are these schools located? Thank you. Thank you.
Want it by, like, district,
District or even
council
zip
district?
codes. Yeah.
District
Are they
or
concentrated in
zip
certain
code.
neighbors or others?
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your good work. I want to buzz through as many of these as possible, so if I cut you off, I apologize in advance, but I appreciate the chair's diligent timekeeping. So first question, we no longer use levels 1 through 4 designation, but we have 4 categories. So for understanding, a 1 isn't necessarily a 1, but it's a pretty close assumption. So the fact that we now have 52 schools that are at level 1 or level 2, or the first 2 category status, what was that number last year? Combined number of level 1 and level 2.
So the state explicitly advises against comparing due to the different methodology, the different weighting, and the inclusion of additional metrics. The other point to get into in particular for that focused targeted support, which is a group where we have the most number of schools in 2018,
Yep.
is that there are different reasons why a school might be in there. So they could be there for a low graduation rate, for low subgroup performance, or actually for low test participation. And we actually had 10 schools that were in that category just because they had a particular subgroup.
Understood. But what is the combined number of level 1 and 2 schools for the last year that we used that metric?
For
Or that-
2017.
Yeah.
I will pull that up for you.
Well, it's higher than 42 or 52. So I guess my point is I understand that you can't compare level 1 with the top level or level 4 with the bottom level of these things, but I think it underscores some concerning data that we're seeing some stagnation as it relates to this. And this isn't an indictment of anyone sitting here or anyone sitting behind me, but I think that it's troubling to me to see that those numbers have gone. We celebrated several years ago that we had the most number of level 1 schools, I think, in BPS's history, or certainly since we've been doing that. We're now changing the designation in terms of how we rank our schools, for lack of a better word, but and I know it's not an exact science, but it doesn't seem to me that we're seeing as positive momentum as perhaps we had thought before.
One thing that's a little tricky with the change to the new accountability system is that actually in 2017, most schools had no accountability level due to the hold harmless provision, so we'd have to go back multiple school years. Or we had schools that remained a designation simply because we were in the hold harmless scenario for several years.
I get that. But again, when I joined this body, which the only person sitting here from either BPS, Nate may have been there, I don't think Dr. Rose was, Mark was there, that was it. We made great, we lauded the fact, and it was a previous administration, that BPS's student population had been growing. This is in 2011, and it's been stagnant. And we sort of need to remember that as we talk about all the money that we're putting into it and as we talk about the budget process. And now, several years ago, we lauded the fact that our schools seem to be improving, and we had more level 1 schools, yet because we're looking at it differently, those numbers aren't quite as impressive. So I just, again, it is important that we have data. It is important that we have uniform data and consistent data, but I just want to make sure that we're doing right by our students, which I know is something you all want. So it'll be interesting to see those breakdowns continue. Graduation rate, congratulations, 75.1% is terrific and something that is great and we should celebrate. Have we begun sort of measuring the number of students who go on to career versus college, and then what the percentage of those students who, a lot of data will be early, but graduate, get a 2-year degree, 4-year degree?
Absolutely, yes. And we're also preparing, I believe in a few weeks, for the publishing of the Boston Opportunity Agenda report card. Will actually include some information around college, career, and life readiness, which will include both post-secondary achievement and persistence, as well as other measures that we know are critical for our students, which also includes the percentage of students that are, during their high school career, engaging in, internships or job readiness training. It also looks at our students and their post-secondary plans as they're getting ready to leave high school, and the students that have a specific plan after graduation, which we know is a research vetted indicator of success, whatever a student's chosen pathway is. We're also including these data in reports that will be shared publicly later this month.
And someone from, I assume you're someone up here, someone behind me, is working with the schools in terms of to keep tabs on those students as they go on to college, just so we can, is that someone in your department?
Probably be someone from the high school office, Marcia, probably. But we are both, in terms of making investments into initiatives, also investing in terms of understanding our historic patterns for students so that we can be really targeted in those interventions.
Okay. In arts education, 96% of pre-K through 8, 68% of high school students. That's great. What are those percentages as it relates to science education? I just didn't see it on the slide. I'd assume it would be.
I'm sorry, I missed the first.
I'm sorry. What percentage of students are offered a science curriculum, both at pre-K to 8th grade and then high school? Do you?
Offered a science curriculum?
Yes. There's a slide, I don't know the number, we correctly laud the fact that 96% of students enrolled in pre-kindergarten through 8th grade are offered arts education. And that number drops a little bit to high school, understandably so, to 68%. Do we have those same percentages for science?
I don't have those numbers with me right now, but we can get those to you. I will say that science is a requirement across the board, and we expect that all of our young people are accessing science curriculum and experiences in their classrooms every day. We recommend the DESE recommended number of minutes per week for our BPS students.
Okay, thank you. And my next round, I want to get into UPK and the ESI and ISEE access, so thank you both.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and thank you to the panelists for your work and for being here with us today. Just want to focus a little on ELL issues, if we may. I spend a lot of time in the district, but especially with students and with parents as well. of ELL, and I'm just curious, what type of engagement are we doing for parents? Maybe as an example, in Chinatown, many of the parents don't speak English. Some of the students are, ELL learners as well. But sometimes there seems to be a disconnect with the parents getting the services for their child. I know there was an increase in translation services in the budget, but what are we doing on that issue to improve the communication, improve services?
Yes, so this is an area where we are constantly striving to improve. One of the ways that we do that is through our District English Learner Advisory Council, where we have family members who are part of the English Learner Advisory Council and give us advice on programming. We have an executive committee that is also represented in various neighborhoods throughout the city that meets every other week. And then we have 3 DLAC conferences per year. We're also in the process of setting up ELACs, English Learner Advisory Councils, based on linguistic group. So we will have one specifically for the Chinese community that will bring together Chinese speakers from various schools so that they can discuss various programs and what's working best for their students and then advise us on those. We also lead English as a second language classes, and in those classes, the content is in how to best support your students. Same with our Technology Goes Home classes, which are led in the native language. Always the content of our parent literacy, our ESOL classes, our Tech Goes Home, the content is always how to best support their students, how to navigate the system, which can be complicated, and also who to contact in the case that they need better support, because we do have parent engagement specialists in all of our major languages. We just recently added Arabic, which is the only one we were missing. And so those parent engagement specialists are the ones who work most closely with the community to ensure that we are communicating and that they are getting meaningful access to what we are doing.
And thank you for that answer. And the other issue as it relates to that is, special education programs for ELL students and their parents. Again, there does seem to be challenges, translation services, how we're communicating. Do we have enough interpreters? Do we have enough mental health counselors that speak a language other than English that they're able to communicate? So I think having a system in place, I know you're working on it and you have a system, but maybe we need to improve it in terms of making sure we provide critical services to parents as well as the students. There doesn't go a day that I don't hear from special education students, their parents, about translation services. So that's an area I hope we can focus on. And then just finally, I know you mentioned the Somalian community. Myself and Frank Baker actually represent as district council as the Mary Ellen McCormick and the Old Colony, and we have a lot of Somalian students there. What are we doing to help bridge the gap for those families, for those students on their language challenges and culture, and how can we improve the system for those students and parents as well?
So one of the things that we're looking into moving forward is how much native language access we can provide not only to our students but to our families. One of the things that we are looking at in the future is a move back to bilingual special education. I know we have done SEI inclusion. However, we do believe that native language instruction and support is key to making sure that our students are doing well. So that is one of the things that we're doing for special education. As far as for the translations and interpretations for our special education IEP meetings, or the forms, one of the things that we do is track very closely all of the requests that are coming in to see how quickly they're being turned around to make sure that nothing is going untranslated or interpreted. We also are building into the Easy IEP system an automated system where it's not Google Translate, but it is authentic translations that can be automatically done for IEPs in Spanish. And we are piloting that now, and hopefully that will be successful and we can expand it to other languages later. Another thing that we are doing is the telephonic, which has been successful. But finally, we are making sure that we're communicating these resources, because a lot of times it's a matter of we have the resources, but not everyone is clear on how to use them or what those resources are. So the other thing that we've been doing is keeping track of who is actually accessing the resources, which principals, which educators, and reaching out to the schools where we see that they are not utilizing the resources so that we can better support them in doing so. I think I missed one of the parts of your question.
No, I think you covered it all. I know you mentioned telephone interpretation. I think that service is important, but I would never want to see that service a substitute as a live body in there
Absolutely.
doing the translation. And then also on my final point, I can wait, more of a comment. When we have a community meeting or a meeting at a school where the school, a high percentage of them speak a language other than English, can there be a policy going forward that BPS always provides an interpreter for that community meeting? I've been to a few, and there haven't been the right interpreters at the right time. But just going forward, if we can at least consider having an interpreter for that community, whether it's for the school itself or services for those students. But that's something that would be very, very important to me.
Yes, we definitely want to make sure that is already our policy. And so if there are ever times when that's not happening, if you could please let us know, because we'll make sure to reach out to that school to let them know how they can access the support, because we don't always know all of the different meetings that are occurring. But if they let us know, we absolutely always provide resources and interpretation in all of the languages that they require.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we've been joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards. Let me now recognize Councilor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. As I've always felt that in order to close the achievement gap, we need to start early as possible and also wrap these students around with as much services as we possibly can, and also put in sort of metrics. If we continue to pass children that that don't have sort of a strong grasp of the subject matter, then we're doing everyone, particularly that child, a huge disservice. And I think there was a period of time where we were just sort of passing kids along through the system, and hopefully that trajectory has changed, and that we've put more focus on the early education piece. So I want to focus on how many pre-K seats will be added to fiscal year 20. What will the total number of pre-K seats be? That's a lot of things we hear. We're hearing that we're adding more pre-K seats, but when you talk to parents across the city, I'm an at-large counselor, so not a lot of folks know what that means and whether or not they're going to have access to those seats.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll be adding 450 UPK seats for this coming year, but I'd like to call my colleague, Jason Sachs, who leads our Office of, our Department of Early Childhood, to answer some specific questions about how many seats total.
Okay. Great. And of the 450, I guess, where will those seats be? And the follow-up will be, how will those new seats affect the future enrollment as well as the weighted student formula there?
So the first 450 seats we're planning will be in community-based organizations, and we are in process of figuring out where they're going to be based on the application. We'll get the applications in May 1st, and then we will determine through a selection process which neighborhoods. It'll be on the strength of the applications and also the neighborhood and the need. And so once we know that, we'll know that in about July, and then we can give you that information about where they're going to be.
These seats will be ready to go by September?
Yes, that's the plan, is to have 450 seats in community-based by September 1.
And my suggestion is that the IAPs, we need to get started on those as soon as possible. Those are painstakingly slow in order to get to the end result. We'd like to have a kid hitting the ground on all cylinders that first week in September, as opposed to going through that that IEP process throughout the entire school year, and then we get an appropriate placement in the spring, sometimes
Yeah,
even worse than that.
Absolutely, and I think we see this being in community-based programs actually as an opportunity to work with students before they're coming to BPS through the public health system, because they're already in community-based programs, so we will be identifying children earlier and thinking about services, so this is a great opportunity to work on that.
And of the 450, how many community-based organizations do we need to step up?
So we're thinking it'll be about 25 classrooms, and the number of organizations we'll know, because it may be probably around 15, we'll have to see, because there'll be multiple classrooms, but we won't know until the applications come in.
Right, but we're going on that, right?
Yeah, we're absolutely committed to, just so you know, in the intent to apply, there was roughly 800 children, so we think there's going to be enough programs out there that are going to apply, but we won't know until the applications come in.
Okay. And then children that are in these 450, how does that affect the future enrollment of other
So we
schools?
hope it increases the enrollment in BPS. I mean, many of these kids probably would have gone to BPS in kindergarten, and many who were in the K-1 seats in community-based programs actually leave to go to BPS during the year. So we're hoping, though, that in the end, this increases enrollment in the Boston Public Schools.
Okay. And then on the back end, obviously, of the, I guess, the K-12 part of it, I know we had mentioned, my colleague had mentioned the 75% graduation rate, but one of the barometers and metrics I use is that it's great that we're graduating more kids, but it's not so great that they're not getting into some of the best schools in the world that call Boston their home. I think that's an absolute travesty. You know, you could be a kid living in the Alastair housing development, look right across the street at Northeastern and have no shot at getting in, and nothing more disturbing than that. So I guess I want to get your thoughts or someone's thoughts on a year 13. That'll be a voluntary year 13 with a very rigorous college curriculum program for serious students who are serious about going on to one of Boston's great colleges and universities, and not necessarily have it sort of be part of the budget, but have it be maybe part of our pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes, where our college and universities will partner with us, identify either a location or a school that we're closing or mothballing to have, again, a one-year intense college prep. And it's for the kid that really wants to go to one of these schools, or may have an opportunity for a scholarship at one of these schools, or maybe it could be an English language learner that just needs an additional year of just intense preparation to get those SAT scores up, get those math, science, English scores up. I think we're missing the boat there, and I know we're boasting of some greater graduation rates, which is great, and that's a total hugs and high five moment. But if that kid's not getting to go to BC or BU or Northeastern or Emerson or Wentworth, I think we can and must do better. We're in a global economy, and you look at Boston skyline and know that the employment opportunities are there, but they're only going to be there if they come out of these schools. So I'd love to get your thoughts on a year 13, not pinning anyone down, just sort of your thoughts. When I went to school, year 13 was really used for athletic purposes. It was to get one more year of speed and strength and sort of maybe a longer sports schedule, and it was also to get into Division I schools. But the trend has been that folks either are holding their children back or are participating in an additional year, and I think that should be afforded in the Boston Public Schools.
So I'll start out and then open it up to others to comment, and I'll just say that it's definitely an interesting idea, one that we should spend some time looking more into. One of the things we obviously just goes without saying we want to do is prepare young people as much as we can to go through a K-12 educational system and not have them, when we think about them being competitive with peers, missing a year of being held back. But if there are opportunities to allow young people to elect into programs that give them an advantage and better prepare them, I think a lot of the colleges and universities do already similar transition programs, oftentimes over the summer, not an entire year. And then when we look at the data around many of our young people, I think the Opportunity Youth report was referenced. When we look at the fact that when they get to often sometimes a 2-year and 4-year colleges, having to take the remedial courses, that's something that we want to do as much as we can up front before they go to post-secondary options to address, and also making sure that we're preparing young people to be successful, in a variety of different kind of post-secondary opportunities. And so I just wanted to say that and say it's something that we definitely look forward to working with you to learn more about. Thank you.
Just thinking about the gap that you're raising between our graduation rates and the real lived experiences of young people when they leave our schools, and how I think, it haunts all of us, right? And the valedictorian's report really shed clear light on that this year. What we've seen in the test scores over the last few years is fairly stagnant, right? And to your point, there have been policies, or not policies, practices, right, of moving students forward, and then we have a 10th grade competency examination. We've noticed that we tend to backslide in the accountability metrics that are new because we focus on that which is tested, right? Frameworks have been changing, the standards have been changing over the last few years, and we tend to do better the second year that a new set of accountability standards is in place. So I want to highlight that in this coming year, this spring, the 10th grade MCAS is going to be aligned to the new next generation standards. And as a result, right, we're likely to see similar trends. That said, we're adjusting curriculum alongside with our teachers and leaders, right? We've learned from some of our smaller networks that the value of, and we've heard this from our leaders and from teacher leaders, that there is extreme value in making common commitments in those small groups of schools that are working together on professional learning experiences, because they can then learn together. So my point in saying that is, as we look to our high schools and the work that they're doing, having common commitments across the board, right, about what graduation looks like will help us to help them to close that gap.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, and apologize for being late today. I just wanted to follow up, and again, if my questions are repetitive, I'm going to just ask that you be patient with me and just be willing to repeat what you said before. I wanted to follow up specifically on the ELL questions. You know, I represent East Boston, so I have a very large population of kids who are new Americans, who are learning English. I'm very, very proud of the diversity. So I want to commend you already on the amount of work. And as you were answering Councilor Flynn's previous question, I thought I was really impressed, and thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on however, on the Meta lawsuit and consent decree or agreement to work with Meta in terms of making sure that we have robust community back and forth and checklists and so on and so forth. And I would love to just hear from you. I know that we have, one, could you describe how BPS is using the $5 million Title I funds, and I think you may have already at length. So could you also, I know that there's part of the consent decree is that there will be an annual determination and that the school committee will collect from each school monitoring checklists. So could you share these checklists with the city council, and have you shared those checklists recently? And then also, under the order of the budget, expenditures for Chapter 1 funds must be determined in consultation with the council with MEDA. So have you shared those checklists with MEDA, and what's the practice to share them in the future?
Sure. So I would love to speak about this. This is something we've done a lot of work on in the past. So we are very lucky to have $5 million of supplemental monies that goes to our schools just to support our English learners. And those are allocated to our schools based on the number of English learners that they have, so that the money is equitably distributed to all of our schools. In the past 2 years, we've been doing a lot of work to ensure that that money is spent appropriately and that it is always spent on supplemental services and not services that are core. This has been an area where we have had to have continued feedback loops with schools and grow over the years. This past year, we actually were very excited to add a Title I budget coordinator that is shared with the Office of English Learners and with the Office of Finance. Okay. Now this person is able to process all of the requisitions that come in from schools for that Title I money and be able to assure that it is being spent appropriately and on supplemental services. So this is a new position we've never had before.
I see.
And with that has come a few glitches in how we've how quickly we've been able to get that information out. However, one thing I will say is that the information that we will be sharing with them next week, with Meta next week, we are very proud to say shows we believe to be the most effective and efficient spending we've done in the past. In the past, when we provide two different things to Meta. We provide a checklist at the very end of the school year that shows how the money was spent. And so that would be closer to May. But earlier in the year, we share budget plans that our principals create during the probable Oregon budget collab process, during their budgets in December. And as for the consultation with Meta, that's one of the areas where we do provide feedback to them, and they provide feedback to us. But again, that process went through a little bit of a different spin this year, as we now have somebody dedicated specifically to that effort who now gives them direct feedback. So we'll be sharing that with them this week. And again, that is for the spending of next year's funds. So they will have plenty of time to let us know how they feel that our schools are planning to spend their money. And that will actually be earlier than I believe they've ever gotten that feedback, even though I know it seems later. It's still earlier because the budget plan process was something we just implemented last year. Before, we used to just send them the checklist at the end of the year that only showed how we had spent the money.
So that's excellent news. Thank you very much for that. So Meta will be getting what they're concerned about, or what their checklists, and in compliance with the consent decree in the next week or so. I won't hold you to the next week, but I assume they'll be getting it relatively soon, actually earlier than they've gotten it before. And whatever glitches in terms of the back and forth has been because of the new position you brought on to coordinate that for all Title I funds?
Exactly.
This $5
Because in
million
the past, the 11,000 lines of spending were actually gone through manually by the Office of English Learners. We realized that wasn't exactly sustainable and efficient, and so that's why we added this position. So to clarify, they will get their Title I budget plans this coming week, and that's for next year's spending. So they'll be able to consult with us and the principals on next year's spending. They will get the checklists for how they spent the money this past year at the end of at around May or June, when they normally get it.
And just the follow-up very quickly is, I had asked also, is there any way that City Council could get the checklists? Not in any rush, certainly after you comply with whatever you need to. Just curious.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll work
All
with you to get that
Thank you.
information.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Edwards. I think we all got those emails, because the questions, because they were really important to have them answered, and there was a great deal of delay, I think, on behalf of Meta. I want to follow back up on the science curriculum questions that were asked earlier, where it's a requirement across the board. Can you tell us what those DESI recommendations are for K through 12? I think it's you, Andrea.
Yeah, I cannot tell you off the top of my head, but one of my colleagues who leads our science department is here. So I'd like to ask Holly if, Holly Rosa, can you come down and share some detail with us?
Great. And thank you, Holly, for coming down. And in the meantime,
Holly, can you take that seat right over there?
Thank you. Thanks, Holly. And then while Holly's getting squared away, can we talk a little bit about the relationship between science education, in particular 6 through 8 education, when we're thinking about Build BPS and some of the restructuring of K to 6, 7 to 12, what those impacts will be when we're breaking up 6 from 7 to 8, and how we'll, or in cases where we're adding 6 to a K to 5 school that didn't have that curriculum before, how that's going to impact those changes and how we'll adapt the curriculum.
Yeah, I think the benefit of having a longer-term capital and strategic plan for our facilities is that it gives us time to redesign what our K-6 and 7-12 curriculum and instructional plans look like. And we have schools that have walked that path before, that are now 7-12s or 6-12s who have moved and reconfigured, and we're in conversation with them to learn from them that impact that you're describing. Yeah, I'll stop there and around the Build BPS piece.
So I can say one other piece on that is at the end of this year, I know the superintendent is looking to move a few of our K to 5s to K to 6s aggressively, and I think many of us, if not all of us, are on board with that schedule. But that is going to, I see Nate going for the mic, that is going to impact some of that science instruction and curriculum. So I want to make sure that those K-5s that will become K-6 will have proper science instruction.
Yeah, and to clarify the timeline in terms of what we're looking to do is start the K-6 expansion for the fall of 2020, which gives us a full academic year of planning specifically for the issue of ensuring that we have supported those K-5s who are expanding to sixth grade in all of the curriculum needs, because it's not just, you know, we've said before, sixth grades are not just bigger fifth graders, and seventh and eighth graders are not just smaller high schoolers. I do think from a Build BPS perspective, one of the things about using our extra high school space to develop our seventh and eighth grade programs is that they will then have access to the buildings and the assets that are currently in our high schools, including science labs and the content leaders in high schools who are thinking about content-specific programming. One of the things about the K-8 expansion that happened 10 years ago was, by and large, we were just adding 6th, 7th, and 8th grade onto elementary school buildings, so those students don't have access to a lot of the science and technology that you might want to see as they get more advanced, particularly for the students who are ready for higher level content and curriculum in 7th and 8th grade. So we do think that part of the 7-12 expansions and using those high school space is going to give those younger students access to more rigor and more resources that are available in our high school buildings.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate.
Good morning. Hi. So these time recommendations come directly from the science, technology, and engineering standards. So 2 hours for grades K to 2, 3 hours a week.
And this is per week?
Per week, yes. For grades 3 to 5. 4.5 hours a week for grades 6 to 8, and 5.5 hours a week for grades 9 to 12. And this is going to become essential that we follow these time requirements for every school when the buildings are broken up K-6 and 7-12.
And how many science teachers do we have in the district, licensed science teachers?
That's a great question, and that's not data that we have right now, but that's data that we can get to you.
Great. And are we making sure that within all of these grade levels, especially the earlier grade levels, I think we do a much better job at the high schools to have certified science teachers teaching science, but in those lower grade levels, are we making sure that we have certified science teachers teaching science?
So that is a priority, that we have science specialists that have the DESE licensure to teach that. But even more importantly, in the district, we're going to be working on building all elementary teachers content knowledge to be able to teach science across the board from pre-K to 5.
Great. And then do we know how many teachers or how many science specialists, not general ed teachers in our elementary schools, but teachers that only teach science, for example, are in our schools? Because they are only required to teach a handful of hours, or kids are only mandated to receive a few hours per week, especially at those early years, do we, when we go through our school budgeting, the school budgets, many of our school leaders are often making decisions, and we're losing science teachers because they're not necessarily one FTE in a particular building because of the hours requirements. Is there any work towards, especially as science is now a MCAS performance measure, I want to make sure that our science teachers are secure in our school buildings, especially in those lower grades where the hours are a little bit sloppy. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
My question was also sloppy, but I think
great question.
you've got the gist of it.
So this is one of the things that we spent a lot of time thinking about, especially recently, because one of the things that will happen is about 2 years or so, you'll see a fourth subject come up in terms of state accountability, MCAS, history and social science. And because we haven't invested in the same ways in the other three subjects in that, I venture to say that those results will not be where we want them to be either, right? And so long-term planning and sort of an academic strategic plan is something that we're looking at, especially with the superintendent transition, to make sure there's a plan across subjects, to make sure that there is when we start to think about how we fund schools and how school leaders make decisions, that there are certain recommendations and standards and requirements when it comes to curriculum and staffing, and that's something that needs to be studied because the pie is only but so big, and how we divide it up is important in terms of how it impacts young people. And so one of the things that Holly mentioned, with science, the strategy has been over the last few years, and I think more so in the recent year or so, is to try to provide more content knowledge in science for teachers who probably, were specialists in either reading or math when they graduated from whatever preparation program they went through. There are not a lot of science preparation programs out there for elementary educators, and the ones that are out there we're working with, and how do we increase the pipeline and, of course, make sure there's a diverse pipeline. So then what we have to do is ourselves, as BPS, is make sure we're providing teachers with those resources as we also think about and plan to make sure that there is a very clear plan for how many instructional minutes we're putting in a day, right? We're going to have to start making sure we have social studies, right, at those early grades as well. And it's only with so many minutes in the day. So that is the work we're looking at doing overall as an academics team.
And I just want to say, we did some work with Holly and some of the community partnerships. I just want to thank her for her work. So I know because it isn't ELA or math, it sometimes plays a very sort of secondary role. So just thank you, Holly, for the work that you do. I think very short-staffed. Thank you.
Thanks. Counselor Janey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to commend you guys on the four-year graduation rates and getting that up to 75%. I think that's wonderful. It still means that 25% are not there, so obviously more work to do. In terms of just a data request, again, if we could have that information broken down by race and by program area. So looking at those 75% graduation rates, I'd be interested in having that by broken down by race. In terms of the arts, also more good news here in terms of looking at the last 10 years, getting the number of students from pre-K to 8 up to 96% over the last 10 years. For high school, it says it's from 26 to 68%. How much of that is BAA versus other high schools?
Do you want to come on down, Tony? So my colleague, Tony Beatrice, who is our Director for Visual and Performing Arts, is going to join us to answer some specific detailed data questions.
Thank you so much.
I think what would help is maybe comparing the amount of arts employees at the high school level. Would that give a picture of
Well, I was interested in just understanding the number of high school students who are receiving this arts instruction. It's up to 68% now. I want to know how much of that share is from Boston Arts Academy versus the other high schools.
We can provide that number. I don't have that.
So I'm going to let you provide that number at another time. I have several questions, and I think we still have a timer here. I'm interested in just unpacking that. So how much of it, is it half of it is because of BAA, or is it just a small piece, what have you? Dual language, I just want to know, what are the plans for expansion? So 5 years ago, before I was on the council, when I was doing organizing work around education, me and my team worked to get dual language at the Umana. That's back when Alex was there, so a lot has happened. I think since then, we've got a school now in Mattapan. What's the 5-year plan to get us where we need to be in terms of bilingualism and biliteracy in the district, in terms of dual language?
Yes. So as you know, we are growing up the programs at the Umana and the Greenwood. So Umana goes up to grade 7 next year.
How many new schools in the next 5 years?
New schools in the next 5 years. I don't have that exact number, but I will say that this coming fall, we are hoping that one of the new UPK programs is a Vietnamese program with Viet Aid. So we have been working with them on their application so that they can be one of the host sites. This has been something they've been working on for the past 2 years. So
wonderful. That's a great segue. And I see my good friend Jason. He may want to come down. I've got lots of questions on the UPK. Thank you, Jason. And thank you for your work. While you're coming down, let me just add, I want to understand the timeline. So the RFP's out, people are going to respond by May. Meanwhile, families were making choices in January. What choices were they making for seats that don't exist?
So they were making choices to get into BPS K-1s mostly.
But usually on the list, it's a choice of schools, and I'm picking this school, that school. So what were they?
So what we're going to do basically is anybody who's currently on a wait list, we will call them and tell them about the existing programs. And then the programs themselves already have families or will be seeking families as well. So it's going to be a multiple entry point in the beginning.
Wonderful. So it's not, it's the students, so if, as a parent, we made a choice, which we did, my family. So Rosie's 4 years old, so we had to go through this process again. If we did not get a school of our choice, or if we got waitlisted, we then the district will reach out.
Tiara will call you, no doubt.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. In terms of making sure that these are high-quality seats, and I know that's your focus, how do we do that? What's the current definition of a highly qualified teacher, number one? And then, assuming that we agree that that's what makes a highly qualified teacher, and I'm not convinced that just having a test and these credentials makes you highly qualified, but assuming that's the measure, how do we ensure that our community-based organizations, that our partners there are getting the supports that they need to meet that standard?
So it's a couple of things. One is it starts with a bachelor degree as just the entry. We want to build pathway programs for masters. We're doing a lot of partnerships with UMass Boston. So that's a piece of it. But I think it's the curriculum and the coaching and the professional development you get that really is going to define that. And we have fidelity to the curriculum and quality instruction measures that we're building into it. And part of the slow role of this is through May through July, when we accept programs, we're going to go there and do needs assessments and jointly develop plans for quality improvement. And quality also isn't just around instruction, it's also comprehensive services, supports for families, culturally sustaining practices. So it's a whole kind of view of what makes strong early childhood programming. I'll stay.
So I have several more, but I will just limit it to one more. I guess from your earlier answer, we won't know the locations until the RFPs the proposals come back. But I guess how does this all fit in with equity and ensuring that we have early childhood education opportunities where we need them most? And so I don't know if that's for you, for all of you to be thinking about how we ensure that we're getting these seats where we need them most and that we are going to, make sure that these are going to be high quality seats.
So I would just say first that we have a plan. And the plan and a process. And the process really is about 6 different groups within BPS and community to really sort of think through how do we do this in an equitable way that really improves quality and gives everybody access. And so there's a lot of policy questions that's going to push us because it'll blend sort of a community-based system that has a different infrastructure and governmental structure behind it, and then you have the Boston Public Schools, and merging those systems to really leverage the strength of all systems to provide the highest quality. And so, I could spend hours on this, but I would say that we have a plan and process. It's sort of working its way up through Charles and Andrea to the superintendent, and then we are building structures to hopefully assure this.
The one thing that I'd add there is that, as you likely know, that we've developed our Assistant Superintendent for Equity, along with the Opportunity Gaps Office and Dr. Rose's leadership, we've developed a set of equity tools that we use to run our major decisions through, and we'll be using that tool to ensure that our students that need and families that need these services the most will have access.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. Just following up on some of the UPK stuff, we put this in, hi Jason, we put this request in, I did for the initial overview hearing, just, at some point in the report, it was 1,500 seats was the gap. We've done something with 750, put in a request, and I'm just renaming it here since this is the most appropriate people, around how we address those. And then now with respect to the other 750, so the plan is to put out the RFP award contracts for up to 450 seats. but right now the gap is 750, right? So is 300 going to be within BPS, and then the 450 is for providers, external providers?
So the 450 is for next September. Then we're going to see how many more community-based programs apply. At the same time, we want to give the Build BPS its process. And so I think these are sort of simultaneous tracks. One is how many quality seats can be created in community-based programs that are comparable to the quality of the Boston Public School seats, so that families are not, they're getting access to high quality. And then at the same time, we have this BPS initiative. And so Nate and his team and others will be looking at that. So I think it's sort of simultaneous, but knowing that next year 450 is the max we want to go.
So with the 750 seats that are left, 450 next year, and then
300 could potentially be in community-based the next year.
Or the, okay.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the idea behind the trust fund is that it's flexible, that it could serve either BPS or community-based, and again, that'll be a process.
But hence the goal 5 years, but it could be shortened, it could be.
We could get it done in community-based programs if there was enough quality applicants.
Right now, community-based providers are being encouraged to apply through the RFP, but the announcement listed some organizations that I think already are sort of a part of this initiative and process already. Okay. And earlier was mentioned there are, I think it was quality elements. What are those elements listed in the RFP or what?
They're actually to your left.
Okay.
And if you just look at them, and if you have specific questions, I'll be happy to go further into them. But those are sort of the 6 areas that are in the program.
Yeah, can you give us a sense, Jason, just sort of what this means for the layperson?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it is focused on the implementation of the curriculum and strong instructional practices. And you're willing, basically, instead of what you were doing, most community-based programs are using creative curriculum and have chose their own curriculum. This is a curriculum, the focus curriculum from BPS is really focused on literacy and math. And strong sort of social emotional regulation opportunities. So I wouldn't say it's more academic, but it's definitely will help you succeed in school better. And so it's a real strong emphasis on the curriculum. Then programs are required to be NAEYC accredited, and we have a process for that. So if they're not already going through accreditation, part of the dollars can be there to support them. Plus, the state has a QRIS system, and so we will push them deeper into improving their quality in all aspects, because it's obviously not just curriculum and instruction. Then it's around engaging families. Some programs have really comprehensive programs, such as Head Start, but others don't. And so we're going to, and also neighborhood services and supports are not even across Boston. So it's also working with Boston Children's Hospital and figuring out how to enhance and strengthen services for families. So it's thinking about that system. Compensation is the biggest sort of part. If it's a large budget, most of this is really going to teacher salaries and director salaries, and that's where the parity is going to really make change. So from a social equity viewpoint, this is a great win. We have found that even if we do great curriculum, if the staff turnover is so high, then it's been a really challenge. And so a lot of the money will really actually just make it way to teacher salaries, which is a win for everybody. And then the last is just some programs, they're in church basements. They were not really designed fiscally, and so we're going to help them kind of strengthen their fiscal management, because obviously this is a large investment in the program, so there's going to be some work around there. So those are sort of the 6 elements of quality.
And the piece around, reducing staff turnover, this equity piece, when you say the money of the 15 million, it's going to go towards this piece here, how much is that?
So generally, money that goes into programs, 70% of it goes into staff salaries. Okay. So it was funny, I was just looking at one of the budgets of an existing program, and about 27% of the money went to it, improved the teacher salary, about 15% went to the assistant teacher, and then I can look it up, but it was like 10% went to the director. So you can see it's a heavy lift for programs to increase salaries, and so it's a large percentage of the budget.
Thank you. I can wait to the next round.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk a little bit about the ESI, the Exam School Initiative, and ISEE access. So if anyone just wants to jump in, what sort of plans are we'll start with the Exam School Initiative and success we've seen. I know The invitations to the 3 exam schools were out last month. Are we seeing it's working? Are we seeing positive trends?
Yes, so we don't have the analysis for this year. We have the analysis for the 2 previous years.
Okay.
So, yeah, the trends are those that go through the program, especially Black and Latino students have, I think, the last 2 years doubled their chances of getting in, opposed to those that don't go through any prep program.
Great.
You know, so we're at 650. This year, we're trying to get over 700 students in that in the ESI. We're over 50% Black and Latino. When we picked it up 3 years ago, it was about 25%. We've tripled the number of Black and Latino students in that program. So we're hoping that we get, again, good results this year.
Can you talk, Dr. Rose, briefly about sort of recruitment? I know my old classmate and former Latin School board member, Rashawn Martin, was very active in terms of going into schools and recruiting kids and talking about it. And I know, as the council president knows, the Black Alumni Council of Latin Schools really put a focus on sort of raising awareness. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So, yeah, we've had meetings with all 5th grade teachers across the district. We really try to enlist the capital within the school. So we've done a lot more research, outreach with schools and specifically 5th grade teachers who would be recruiting students. We stipend them actually out of my office, you know, throw them a bone about $100 to get those students, the allotted number of students within their buildings into the program. We also do a lot of research outreach centrally. And so we have targeted lists of students that have performed well in their school on MCAS that we personally call and make sure that they come to the program. And so it's kind of multifaceted.
Yep.
But there's a lot more awareness, I think, of the program, especially now that we're bringing the testing to the school next year. Over the last 3 or 4 years.
Good. And has there been any sort of connection, and this is somewhat off topic, but I would think it would be in your team's bailiwick, number of kids of color who leave BPS in the 6th grade to go to a charter school? Because I know there are recruitment efforts as well.
So that's a tricky question because it's not that. Our team doesn't really go and outreach at charter schools. It's very difficult for us. No,
but there are students that leave.
Yes.
I mean, we know the data of kids who leave traditional BPS and go to charter schools.
Starting 4th grade and 5th grade, yeah.
So I guess I'd be curious to get that information as well, because we are seeing, the point of my question, perhaps I'm asking it inelegantly, is that laudable efforts to recruit more African American and Latino students to take the exam school initiative and to prepare for the 3 exam schools. Yeah. Our pool of would-be candidates is affected by the fact that you've got many kids of color who, for whatever reason, their parents, they decide to go to charter schools.
Metco charter schools.
Metco charter,
yes. Yeah. I think things like EFA and trying to encourage families that historically feel like they've been misserved by this district, convincing them that we are really upping the river and committed to creating the educational environments for their students, that they don't have to go run to Metco or to a charter school. I think that is the most important piece of work we can be doing as a district.
I agree. Okay, and then on that end, talk a little bit about ISE access that will be offered in all 6th grade and 8th grade classes in BPS this year?
6th grade.
Not 8th grade?
Not 8th grade,
okay. Is that something we'd be looking at expanding?
I think we'd have to balance, again, the disruption to school versus the amount of seats that open up in 9th grade. I think we wanted to. We didn't want to bite off too much the first year, anyways.
Understood.
Counselor, I have the numbers in terms of students leaving for charter schools. I'll just note, as Colin mentioned, the exiting after 4th grade to 5th grade is where we see the majority of our students leaving for charter schools, and this is across racial and ethnic groups. Between 4th and 5th grade, over the last 6 years, we've seen something around 11 to 12% of our students in the 6th to 7th grade transition. That's a much less common transition point for charter schools. The range has been anywhere from 1.9, 1.6 to about 2%. So you don't see that many students. That's not the traditional exit point. Broken down by racial groups, a percentage of 4th graders who are leaving to go to charter schools, we do see about 8%, anywhere from 7 to 8% of our students who are Black that are leaving to go to charter schools. that is the highest percent of any racial group that's leaving to go to charter school.
7 to 8% of the student body, African American, go off to charter school?
Yes.
So, and then do you have the percentage of that 11 to 12? And you're correct, Nate, I should have mentioned the fourth grade is the major exit point. I would assume if it's 8% of the general student body, then it's a very, very high percent of those 11 to 12% students who are leaving to go to a charter school.
That's likely to be the case. I just don't
Like-
have that number in
yeah,
front of me, but I
no.
certainly can, if you put in a request, we can break that down by whichever categories you'd like over the years that we have data.
I mean, I would just assume I will make that formal request, but I would assume just based on mathematics, it would be the vast, vast majority, if not 70, 80% of those students whom we lose to charter schools in the fourth grade are kids of color.
Specifically, African American or black students, I think we've seen that charter schools disproportionately don't serve our English learners, our students with special
That's right.
education. And they're not traditionally an option that white families were choosing. That basically leaves African American or black students who are choosing charter schools, and that represents their demographic here in Boston as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Flaherty.
I think a third of our transportation budget is to the charter schools. Do we know what percentage, aside of the charter schools, how many go to private or parochial schools via the Stepping Stone program or recruitment efforts by folks like BC High and Catholic Memorial and other schools like that that are targeting Boston Public School kids and city kids to participate in their programs?
So in terms of the specifics on the programs that you mentioned run by schools at Catholic Memorial, we don't have that kind of information. We do have the data in terms of when students are leaving to go to private / parochial / METCO is kind of the category, and then charter schools. The data that's in front of me right now is the churn by grade level, so you
Gotcha.
can see where students are leaving and for what purpose. You do see that from the 4th and 5th grade, the exit point for that's very specific to the charter sector. That's because a lot of our charter schools are 5th through 12th grade.
Yep.
In terms of students who are leaving BPS, you don't see the same sort of grade level specific data for the private parochial METCO. That tends to be pretty consistent. And I think that fits with some of the questions we've gotten before, which is if we're not getting the students in K1, K2, then the families are enrolling in those parochial schools.
Gotcha.
And by and large, people are fairly, consistent, sticky, that once they get into a school, they're going to stay in that school. And so we don't see as many students exiting. And the parochial schools tend to follow much more consistent traditional BPS grade patterns, I think, because our systems were created at the same time, whereas the charter schools have kind of created that disruption in the 5 through 12, which is, again, not to make this about Bill BPS, but one of the reasons that we're looking to create this K6, 7, 12 is to both match our existing large turnover that happens with the exam schools, but also to recognize that a lot of those families are leaving in after 4th grade because they're looking to minimize their transitions, and they know that if they get into a charter school, regardless of whether or not they get into the exam school next, they basically know, I don't have to change schools unless I'm getting into the exam schools, and that is appealing to families and something that we're looking at. When we start to evaluate our pilot of K6, 7, 12, we're going to be looking very closely at, does this increase our retention rate, not only in 6th grade, but also in 5th grade as well.
And also, sibling preference is still a factor for parents that choose Boston Public Schools, where they have multiple children. Once they get a child into that particular school, if that's the school of their choice, and that's a school where there's lots of great things happening, that they're more likely to want their other siblings, the other children.
I believe that's our largest way, sort of assignment
to capture
category.
that. Okay. We had talked the other day about the under-enrolled schools and what we can do to turn them around. I suggested maybe we identify those under-enrolled schools and reduce the class size, maybe put a second teacher in their classroom, add some art, music, and just to create a buzz. A big part of it, I think, is sometimes we don't do a good enough job in the PR department of telling these great stories that are happening in our schools all the time. So there may be a school that does not have tremendous parental participation. That seems to be a common denominator on the schools that have the hot buzz. There's strong parental participation, but for those that do not have that type of participation, do we do things like cut the class size in half or add a teacher to the classroom to create that type of buzz? Do we think about maybe adding another exam school or two? Maybe an exam school for, health sciences to train the next generation of nurses and physician's assistants and doctors, or technology and robotics. I mean, do we sort of think outside the box? I mean, the buzz is the 3 exam schools and our arts academy, which is great. It's, sort of the jewel of the fleet, if you will. But could we start to think a little bit differently about those exam schools? And then I know we're creating more competition for the exam schools. I know that we're going to be having the exam actually at the school sites, which is great to get more participation. But should we take it a step further and think about maybe we're looking at Boston skyline and look at all the companies that want to come here and look at the job opportunity down the road? We're in a global economy. What sectors could we serve our residents? We want that to trickle out into our neighborhoods. And I'd love to see us have a school for healthcare, an exam school for technology and robotics. So we'll still have our Latin. We'll have our Latin Academy. We'll have our O'Brien for math and science. We'll have our Arts Academy. But do we start thinking a little bit about that? So I would like to get your thoughts on that, because at the end of the day, it's about the buzz. It's the PR. It's a lot of the hullabaloo around these schools that engage the parents and get people excited about it. And a lot of good things are happening throughout all of our schools, but there are some that don't have that type of PR. Is there a thing that we could do for them?
So I'd love to just sort of piggyback off of what Dr. Rose was sharing about the EFA expansion from pilot to kind of a full district-wide approach to the idea of excellence for all, really, which underlies the philosophy around the essentials and all of the upping the rigor work that we're doing. And with that in mind, adding more opportunities at the high school level is absolutely in line with what we're thinking. Not necessarily through an exam school approach, but making sure that all of our young people have access, an opportunity to experience and engage in and be exposed to high demand, high wage careers in STEM. We have a number of relationships with the PIC. As you likely know, we're in the final stages of hiring an executive director for STEM. And through that work, through partnerships, and really through connecting back to what Holly was sharing about science education at the very youngest grades, including all the way down to K0 as we're strengthening our focus curriculum, the look is, a full-scale P through 12 engagement, right, that allows for our young people to have access at all levels, with some really specific sort of tailored, thoughtfully tailored programming at our high schools as well.
Gotcha. Through the chair, Councilor Janey was suggested she wanted students to be able to learn 3 languages in the Boston Public Schools. It'd be a great idea to have a language arts academy that turns around and it's arguably like an exam school where anyone that goes there comes out, graduates, and learns 3 languages in a global economy. That's a huge game changer for that student and their family. So
absolutely, would love to add that by the end of this school year, we'll have about 3,000 students will have the opportunity to have the seal of biliteracy on their diplomas, and that's both a combination of English learners and students whose native language is English, who've acquired a second language through BPS.
Awesome.
I also just wanted to highlight, this budget includes a $500,000 investment in our welcome centers and our Office of Engagement, specifically to do 2 things. One is to advertise BPS and the success that we already have. As you mentioned, families in terms of the buzz. We have a lot of great things happening that people don't know about. Either the schools that are doing great work for underserved populations, or just really, we don't need to create an exam school for health careers because we have the EMK School for Health Careers that is one of the jewels, as you mentioned, in terms of our portfolio. So part of it's going to be advertising BPS, making sure. The other part of it is to help and the Welcome Center, so that when families come in, they understand the full suite. With 34 high schools or 32 high schools, it's difficult to know all of the high schools that are going on, right? This is a far more complicated system than any of our neighboring towns. And so it can be a very daunting task if you're an eighth grader thinking about the high schools that you can choose And we have some of our middle schools that do a great job. I've obviously been working with the McCormick staff a lot this year, but listening to how they get their students ready to make choice was a really interesting part of their process and something that I think we can learn from. But so I think it's about educating people about the great things we have going on as much as it is also creating greater programs and stronger programs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chair. And through the chair, I would say, I really appreciate and applaud Councilor Flaherty's reference to all of these goals, especially when we think about secondary education. And I'd say for at least some of us, if not all of us on the council, Madison Park really does provide an opportunity to do that for so many of our kids. We've talked a lot about the Excellence for All, advanced work, our language capacity and desire to grow our language capacity through some of our programs. And going back to Build BPS and the impact of Build BPS on these programs, will all of the studies that are going to come out for EFA, our work around excellence, advanced work classrooms, our language, are we making sure that we have the capacity to adjust those programs as we move K to 6, 7 to 12, that we have enough teachers in the pipeline to continue the languages that we're introducing to our students at the lower grades, that it expands to the higher grades through middle school and high school years? And are we planning for that through our budget process so that as we offer kids something when they're younger, we can continue to offer it through their school years?
So we have a number of work groups currently underway at BPS, and pretty sure that they will be continuing in future years. One of them is sort of centered around the Look Act and looking at this idea of bilingual, multilingual programming across the district and the other components that come along with the Look Act. There's also, as a subset of the English Learners Task Force, a ad hoc committee that was created called Multicultural, Multilingual BPS. And that group is rightfully so pushing us to think about how we are moving BPS in that direction with almost over half of our students having access or having speaking another language. The syllable literacy was mentioned, and so we're thinking about how we sort of bake that into our overall approach, not only just for English learners, as someone said earlier, but as something that we believe is important for global citizenship. There are, for Build BPS, a number of subcommittees, but we work on this team on the academic subcommittees, and there's one looking at K-6, and then there's a 7-12 one as well, and we're looking at how we connect that work. A lot of the 7-12 work was actually done with a group of headmasters who are in a professional learning community this year as a part of our network structure. So they're actually providing us with their expertise around what 7-12 design looks like, and we're merging that with the K-6 discussion. So it's a lot of ongoing work groups that all feed up to our sort of senior leadership Build BPS committee that meets weekly, so that we're having, I think, for the first time in a long time, organization-wide conversation, and I'm sure that everyone up here, including the folks in the gallery, would say that BPS has been a large part of our lives this past year, and so that planning is going on.
And can we identify, thank you for that, and I appreciate that that's continuing to work, and I get that it's a big part of your lives, and I appreciate that it's a big part of your lives as we make some significant changes in the district. You know, this hearing today is certainly budget related. It's how we're spending and choosing to spend our resources, what the policies are that impact those decisions. When we think about engaging our students in student achievement, what are the biggest factors that we see a very direct relationship to student success? If you all, I guess if we could run down the line and if you could share with me the 2 or 3 things that are must-dos because we see a significant impact on student achievement, what would they be?
Yeah. So I'm sure we have a long list on this panel. I'll just start with the sort of plug for what we've been naming in BPS as standards-aligned and essentials-informed instruction. And we talk about high-quality instruction in classrooms. And to say that in a different way, I think it is one of the things that Councilor O'Malley mentioned is that in previous administrations there was a lot of success in terms of the state accountability frameworks and rankings. One thing that's important for us to understand is that the state, and rightfully so, is continuously moving those targets, right, and ratcheting up the level of rigor, not only with the assessments, but also with the frameworks, right? And so a lot of things that have changed. For example, our newest science frameworks were just recently put in place in 2016. We're now in the process of trying to catch up to make sure that we are meeting the rigor called for in those frameworks. And so making sure when we go into classrooms, and I think this is something that Andrea mentioned earlier, we go into classrooms, we are laser-like focused in making sure that students are receiving quality tasks that are at grade level. And when you look at a recent national research report done by the New Teacher Project called Opportunity Myth, it talked about all the aspirations of young people in urban systems across our nation. And many of them have high expectations for themselves, just as the young people who were featured in the Valedictorians Project. Teachers have high aspirations as well, and what we know where teachers have high expectations for students, students will rise to the occasion. And so it is making sure that teachers have the tools that they need to actually continue to hold students to high expectations, and that they have the support they need to provide high-quality curricular materials in classrooms. The last point I'll make is that over the last 10 years of ed reform or so, we've seen the pendulum sort of swing one way, and now it's swinging back the other direction. In the last, beginning of the last 10 years, I would say there was a focus on get a dynamic school leader, let them hire the teachers more autonomy. They'll figure out the curriculum. We'll give them the standards, and they'll figure it out. What the recent report I just mentioned, the Opportunity Myth, shows is that while that might be true for some cases, where there is not a consistent, high-quality curriculum supported by a central office, there is less likely to be standards-aligned instructional materials that are of high quality. And this is what led to students not being taught to on grade level. And so the Council of Great City Schools put out a report in 2017. Those are our peer districts across the country. They educate 7 million of our children in urban cities. We're one of them. Put out a report that really focused on curriculum as an important lever in terms of student achievement, especially educating students with disabilities and English learners, that we have to go back to as central offices. And it doesn't mean that we take away schools' autonomies. It means that we clearly define the things that we're going to provide support on and the areas where they have the autonomy to be innovative and to do the good work that they do.
Well, the one thing I'd just follow up, and then I'm well out of time, is looking at that curriculum obviously is critical and important to engage our kids in learning. But what I've seen over my experience in the Boston Public Schools is that we invest in this new curriculum. This is a budget hearing, and the books never get unpacked. The curriculum never gets unpacked. It sits in boxes in book rooms across our district. And we've spent a lot of money, and we haven't sort of unpacked, literally and metaphorically, unpacked those boxes, supported our teaching staff on whatever the new curriculum is of the day. And we fall back into old routines and what we know is comfortable because we don't have the support, like you said, of folks, and I think that's the relation with the central office to do that work. So I would suggest before we invest in our resources in new curriculum and a new way of doing business, which we should be doing, we have to make sure that we're committed to literally unpacking those boxes before we give those tools to our teachers to roll out into their classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Thank you. And just to build on what my colleague just said, I think it's important that we take the time to learn from the different initiatives. So you use the unpacking of the curriculum as an example, but I've seen in my time trying to work with BPS, partner, push, advocate for improvements, whatever the new sexy is of the day. We all run to that, we do it for a couple of years, and then we go on to the next thing. What we don't do is we don't learn what were the opportunities, what worked well, what were the challenges, was this good? We did that with the high school renewal, we did it every time we get a new superintendent. So this is a very timely conversation that we really take the time to reflect and figure out what actually works and what do we need to do better and more of. Just in terms of dual language, I heard when I was back in my office, someone mentioned the ELL task force. So I just want to shout out Mass Advocates for Children, which is where I come from. We were the ones who advocated to get this school committee task force back when Reverend Groover was the chair of the school committee. And it became the model for now the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force, the Inclusion Task Force, and all that good work. I want to come back to ELL and then Opportunity and Achievement Gap because it's all very much related. Very important that there be a plan moving forward to get us to bilingualism. We're not going to get there just treating bilingualism or the opportunities within the district solely for English language learners. Obviously, we need to do all we can. We know that almost half of our young people in Boston Public Schools are coming from households that speak a language other than English. We want to celebrate that diversity. We want to make sure that those students are well prepared, not only in learning English, but in the academic work, and obviously in preserving their own language and their own culture. So that is very important. But if we are talking about true bilingualism for all students, which is what I heard you open up with, then we've got to do more, and there's got to be a forward-thinking plan that says, to get there, each year, we need to do X amount to expand those opportunities. And so I think moving forward, it'd be very important to kind of have that kind of 5-year, obviously you've got a new superintendent coming, so we want to do this in partnership or under that leadership, but important to have a plan. Otherwise, we're just kind of chasing our tails. I want to come back to the expectations piece, and I know it's critically important. It's why, when I offered hearing orders on teacher diversity, and when I had the hearing last year on teacher diversity, one of the things that we found when we talk about the importance of teacher diversity is this notion of expectations. But how do we really measure that? Like, how do you determine, how are we looking at that now as a district? I mean, it's not something that you can really quantify, or at least if there is a way to do it, I'm not sure what that way is. So I'm certainly happy to hear from the experts on this panel that talks about how we really measure high expectations when we're looking at teachers and what they expect from their young people in front of them.
Yeah, I think there's, and you guys can add in after, but a couple ways that we're thinking about it. One, we are piloting a survey that is trying to get at things like implicit bias of staff, and not individual staff got you, but like what are some of the broad issues we have as professionals within BPS that we need to start addressing and talking about. And then I would also say what's actually happening in the classroom. So when you walk into a classroom and you know what grade you're looking at, and you know the standards, and students aren't being provided either the scaffolds to get to those places, or they're being over-scaffolded into the standards, so they're not actually using their ability to get to the rigor. I think, we need to think about, we need to think not only what's happening in that classroom, but who are the students in that classroom. Like, how do we disaggregate who is actually getting access to rigor, which I think the Opportunity Myth report is talking about. But I think there are some tales and signals that we can use to see where the expectations lie in our schools and our classrooms.
Right. And then I guess the question is then how do we really support our teachers and help move them to a different place if we find that. So if we find that, then we've got to then take steps to ensure that the expectations are going to be high, right?
So one of the things, and thanks for that question, because it allowed me to come back to the curriculum piece that I mentioned earlier, and because I would be remiss if I didn't make clear that not just purchasing curriculum and high quality materials, but also that there is an infrastructure and support to provide teachers with whatever professional learning they need to work to facilitate conversations. I mean, they're experts, they're doing the work on the ground with kids, but we're not providing the time and opportunity for them to think through what's working and what's not. I think that's the work that takes us to the next level. So it is not just the curricular piece, but also the professional learning and teaching teachers how to help facilitate the conversation with teachers of how to keep high standards for them.
Right, and one thing, when we talk about curriculum that I've advocated for, and Dr. Rose knows this, is a decolonized curriculum, one that is going to ensure that all voices are being heard and represented. Thank you so much. I know I'm over time, and thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you.
Thanks.
Counselor Campbell.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. So just continue on the dual language program and Counselor Janey's line of questioning. Anything, I'll wait. I just realized.
You can pose a question if you'd like to.
Say again?
You can pose a question.
Okay,
Yeah.
just looking at, I have I was happy to hear about the Vietnamese and Viet large population in my district, but also been getting a lot of questions related to the Cape Verdean community, those who speak Portuguese. After they saw the rollout, of course, in Mattapan, have questions around when will they get a similar program for that language. So I'm curious what the plan is with respect to some other languages. Anything else on the horizon?
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles.
No problem. So one of the things I think I mentioned earlier, that in order to actually make sure we do it in a thoughtful and equitable way, one of the work groups that we launched this past month was the Look Act work group, looking at how we thoughtfully go about expanding dual language opportunities to schools and school communities. And this work is being done through, obviously, our Office of English Learners, but also our English Learners Task Force, who told us that this is really important. We've been wanting this for a long time, but be very thoughtful about the way you do this, because simply dropping those programs into schools is not helpful in terms of sustainability and quality of programming. And so what they actually tasked us with doing is going back and having an internal working group, central office members, many of whom are on this panel, to think through how do we structurally embed a dual language programming and the support for dual language programming through the functions of central office, so that when it's baked into everything that we do in our processes, so that when it's time for a school to put it together, is not the heavy sort of unsustainable lift. So that's where we are with the work now, and we just launched that this past month in looking at how we try to get those programs to get off the ground. There are some communities who have had a longer wait and conversation and push, so we're, I think, actively involved, and I think, Priya, I don't know if you heard the question we were talking about dual language program in Cape Verdean community.
Is any possibility, so some of the new working groups that you guys are referencing I've also heard about, which sound like really great. Any possibility for folks on the council side to join some of these conversations, even if it's not a counselor or directly staff member? I'm looking at my chief of staff, who cares deeply about this issue, has been working on this issue for a really long time, and would love to be at the table informing the conversation and working in partnership. So be curious, is there any appetite to expand the group outside of BPS to include other departments to participate?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. Once we get sort of the internal stuff together, we definitely will move in that direction.
And I just wanted to add about the Cape Verdean program.
that.
Sorry about that.
So it's important that if you went to the ladies' room that you do that. It's important.
Thank you. So we actually just posted positions for teachers to support us with the writing of the Cape Verdean Creole curriculum. So one of the things that we did learn from launching the Haitian Creole curriculum is that it can be a challenge when you're thinking about materials. So actually we last summer sent a group to Haiti to actually get authentic materials. And as we've been writing the first 2 years and curating the first 2 years of curriculum for Haitian Creole, we've realized some of the things that we need to do more strategically with the Cape Verdean Creole curriculum. So we're trying to use our, past lessons to make sure that when we are writing this curriculum, it is really high quality, that there are assessments that are already aligned. So we already have started working with the Cape Verdean teachers and educators in Boston Public Schools to start that process.
What's the number? I'm just curious.
Of teachers?
Yeah.
I believe we're having 10 teachers in that process.
And just moving on for sake of time, but thank you for that update. It's very helpful. For high schools, do we currently break down by high school their graduation rates and how their students do when they leave specific high schools?
Yeah, so we have published in our annual reports the breakdown of the graduation data and also like annual dropout data, the 5-year graduation rate, things of that nature for each school published. And we're happy to share the most recent report with you.
Thank you. Going back to, I think this aligns with, every question that every counselor has probably asked, if not this budget cycle, previous budget cycles, what do we do around the achievement gap? What do we do to get this right? What do we do? What will it take? Even following up to Counselor Sabi George's line of questioning a few minutes ago. But one of the things I want to pull out, and I think, Colin, you hit on this all the time, is the importance of addressing environment, culture, past history, and how certain students and families were served or disserved in the past, and how critical your work is to every single department, every issue that we touch, and the importance of talking about race, systems, right, not individuals that have showed up and failed our constituents. So I just am curious to pull apart a little bit more of your department, now that you have a budget and staff, what does your touch look like within BPS? Not just central office, but the training of our staff, our teachers. I envision on the council side, anyone who's here has the opportunity to go through racial equity training soon. And we've talked to your office about that and learned some best practices, including from Becky. But I envision at some point, if we really want every department in the city of Boston to be successful in addressing inequities, that we have to be trained, we have to be given the language and the tools. So where are you with respect to reaching, where are you currently, and then how do you reach every single person that touches our students, touches our BPS system, whether it's a partner or anyone else, to ensure that they also have that level of understanding?
Yeah, so, we started out, we did 2 years of professional development with every principal in our district as the lead learner within their building. That amounted to almost 40 hours of CLSP training. We also did department heads. We did every lead teacher across the district, which every school had a lead teacher at the time. They're still there, but the lead teacher program looks a little bit different now. We worked with over 100 partners in a series of professional developments. And then we started working at the actual structures and the systems. And so every single school has a CLSP goal attached to their quality school plan, which is their CLSP SMART goal.
A what?
Culturally and linguistically, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, which is our framework for cultural proficiency in the district. Every school has a SMART goal on which they're talking about race, culture, bias, and how it affects their practices and structures within their schools. And that's ongoing practice that happens every year. Part of partner BPS, to be a high priority partner, your organization needs to be thinking and talking about that. So John Sproul, when he was here at the head of the partnership office, embedded that into that. So we've embedded ourselves into most of the accountability systems within this district. We are creating an online self-paced course that we hope will be required for any individual coming into Boston Public Schools. The main thing that we need to see when we talk about rubber meeting the road, though, is the culture, right? And so we've set up the structures, we've had the training, but when we see things that are not right at schools, when we talk about rigor in a classroom, are we willing to step up and talk about it? And I think those are the places we're still trying to push the culture, the curriculum to match what we want to see our students learning and the awareness that we want our students to have. But that's a long-term process. And so I think, we've done a good job of embedding ourselves in the systems and training. But now it's like, what does it look like on the ground? And are we as the professionals in BPS willing to stand up when we see things? I always say jaywalking is against the law, right? But we have to be willing to enforce that law. And so I think we've done a good job over the past 2 years of embedding it, and we're working on the culture now of accountability and support.
Is every teacher, and this is my last one, I think, is every teacher, staff, and person in central office required to undergo your sort of level of training? And if not, how do you incentivize that to happen? Because I imagine, maybe it isn't, that is a goal of your office too, at some point.
So we started with every department head, every school leader, right? And so what we're hoping, especially with the CLSP goals in schools, is that they're having conversations that are aligned and customized to their environment, right? So I don't want to, our training around awareness was fairly one size fits all because we want to talk about the historical paradigms we live under. But when you get down to a school level, there are schools that have been having these conversations for 10 years. There are schools that are just starting, right? And so we want to be able to be consultants around how do you do the work that, give them toolkits, give them readings, give them ideas, but we don't want to mandate one size fits all at the school. And I would say the same thing around the offices, but we need to mandate that we're talking about it, which I think is what we've done.
And do the schools have any budgets for this type of work?
I would say, and I said even for my own office, this is almost the smallest bucket of money that we've had to spend. What really we want is time, right? So I think, in schools and in school systems, time is your investment, right? Are you willing to take the time to talk about these issues? And again, are you willing to hold each other accountable for the practices that need to follow? So we support with mini grants and things like that when schools need supplies or want to bring in an expert, but it's really time.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Silva.
Councilor Edwards.
Further detail, we can do it offline. On the early education component in that conversation, and again, I wasn't here for it, so I apologize if this is repetitive. But I'm curious, looking in my district at the East Boston Early Education Center, there was a conversation somewhat started last year with combining it or looking at its future with the Allegheny School that's also within the same kind of physical space. If this is too particular to my district for this hearing, I'm happy to also follow up offline. If there's, maybe you could speak generally to the futures of the early education centers and how they're going to, with Bill BPS, either grow or shrink.
So currently with the Bill BPS plan, there's no plan to eliminate the early education centers, early learning centers, EECs, ELCs. As you know, the student assignment plan guarantees everyone access to the closest EEC or ELC on the list. So that it's a component of our student assignment plan policy, so they're critical for that as well. In cases where we're talking about reconfigurations in a neighborhood, we have been including the EECs and ELCs in those conversations so that they can think about how they interact. I know in the Grove Hall Alliance, those school leaders have put forth a proposal to change have talked about potentially changing grade span of the EEC, ELC. In other neighborhoods, they cover different grade spans. I'm thinking of the Ellison Parks in Mattapan that goes to third grade. In all cases, we're committed to continuing the surround care option for families that gives the 7:30 to 4:30 time and provides, the access to those programs. But we are going to continue to have those conversations to make sure that the ECs and ELCs work within our neighborhoods and the feeders and the schools around it as well, because they're a really critical component to our early childhood portfolio.
Great, and we can follow up about East Boston offline. It's
Yes.
okay.
Sorry, I didn't. The specific question was, I do know that there have been conversations around the Allegheny and the East Boston EEC between the two schools, and it is part of the conversation, but there's no explicit plan yet for any merger.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Counselor? You're all set. Great. You have anything else? Okay. All right, great. Thank you, team, for providing great testimony today, and this hearing stands adjourned.
Now we can go to the bathroom.